I don't want to keep you very long. You probably have kids. You have some traditions that you want to keep, some Christmas Eve traditions. I personally love Christmas Eve service. We've had this tradition in our family for the last 16 years that on Christmas Eve, we go to a nice restaurant. So as a pastor, typically Christmas Eve is really busy. I expected this would be the one year where I don't have any responsibilities. And then Phil called at 11 and just threw everything and upside down. Seems to be the way God works. Messes up our traditions, doesn't he, sometimes? But it was 11 years ago when really we moved to the area, and Christmas Eve was very busy, so we didn't have time to make dinner. We went out to eat afterwards, and we ended up at the one place that was open, one of the few places that are open. You can always find a pizza place, right, on Christmas Eve. So that's been our tradition, and there's actually some people here who have joined us a few times for pizza on Christmas Eve. That's something that we do. It actually started before we moved to Central Florida, back when we lived up in a rural area in the Panhandle. We would go out because in this church where I served, everybody was a family. And so they didn't need another reason to get together with family at church, because they were going to do their own thing anyway. So my family and I always found ourselves with nothing to do. So we would go, and we would end up at the nice restaurant in town. We would go to the place. It had the nicest ambiance. It was actually the town over from us, and it was open. They have the red candle on the table. It's always lit, just perfect for Christmas. I'm talking, of course, about Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut was the nice restaurant in this little town at the nicest. So we would go and we would do that. So for 16 years now, we've had pizza on Christmas Eve every year. I don't know what traditions you have. I remember growing up, we would go to Christmas Eve service, and then we would end up at an extended family's house, usually grandparents. A couple years, I remember we would always go to either my mom's parents' house or my stepmother's parents' house on Christmas Eve. One year, my dad's parents, my grandfather on my dad's side, came to visit us, and he brought presents. We were always allowed to open one present on Christmas Eve. Do you guys have that tradition? Maybe some of you. I don't mean to set up any false expectations for the kids in the room, but that's what we did in our family. And I remember very specifically opening this gift from my grandfather on that Christmas Eve. It was this is the exact thing that I opened. I had to put it together, but this is a G.I. Joe fighter jet. It's the X-30 with detachable missiles and probably a ejection seat. I don't know, something exciting like that. But I remember it so clearly. Working landing gear. And that was the present that I opened. I think I was in probably third grade. And that was part of the tradition, just something that I always looked forward to. What traditions do you have? What traditions do you have in your home that give you that sense of rootedness? As long as, everything else in the world could be crazy and out of sorts, could be upside down, but as long as we have this one tradition in our home, everything's okay. What is that for you? Maybe you're bummed out this year because I was talking about grandparents and you can't be with your grandparents this year. I have some older friends who have been quarantining for 2 weeks now just so they could see their grandchildren because they haven't been able to see them since March. I mean, the world is completely upside down and backwards. Maybe you typically travel out of state to visit family and you can't do that anymore. You can't do that this year. I don't know what your traditions are. I think there's something valuable to traditions. I think they give us that sense of steadiness when the world around us seems out of control. But I also believe that Jesus came to interrupt some of our most sacred traditions. The things that we hold so near and dear, the things that give us security, the things that give us a sense that everything is going to be okay, when really and truly we're supposed to find those things in our relationship with God, in our connection with Jesus. But we tend to look for those things in other places, and I think sometimes it's those traditions that become a distraction from the kind of life that God is really inviting us to live out. I think that Jesus came to interrupt our most sacred traditions so that he can reorient our hearts to something true, to something lasting, to something real. There's a few different versions of the Christmas story in the Bible. You got the story in Matthew, which is told from Joseph's perspective. The story about how he found out that his betrothed wife, Mary, was pregnant, and he was planning in his mind to divorce her, but God interrupted his plan, and an angel came and told him, don't be afraid to take Mary to be your wife, because the one who says conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. This is crazy. That God has brought this baby about. This is unlike anything else you've ever heard, Joseph. Don't be afraid. God is up to something. Change your plans. You got the story in Luke where Mary is visited by an angel, and she hears about what's going to happen, that she's going to be with child. She says, how can this be? Because I'm a virgin, she said, and she's told by the angel that she'll be overcome by the power of the Holy Spirit, and the one to be born in her would be called Emmanuel, God with us. They should name him Jesus, Joseph is told, because he will save people from their sins. Those are the Christmas. That's the Christmas story proper. That's what we usually think about when we think about the Christmas story. But I want to mix things up a little bit. I want to look at John chapter 1. John chapter 1 is the cosmic Christmas story. And I'm not talking about, like Jesus listening to Pink Floyd with black lights and a tie-dyed shirt. Not that kind of cosmic, but like big picture Jesus. Jesus before Jesus was born, Jesus. Jesus there in the beginning with God, Jesus. It starts like this. This is John chapter 1, verse 1 through 5 says that in the beginning was the Word. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, the Word there is Jesus. Jesus is the Logos, is what that word is. It's the reason for everything. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And all this about Jesus. That Jesus was there before there was anything. Get this picture of Jesus in your head. If you can, try to wrap your mind around it. We're not talking meek and mild baby Jesus in a manger. We're not talking bruised reed he wouldn't break Jesus. We're not talking humble and submitted Jesus. We're talking about Jesus as with authority over all things because it was entrusted to him by God the Father. And he was there in the beginning with God at his side. In fact, John says, ready for it? Hold on to your seats. He was God in the beginning. And the Holy Spirit was there in the beginning. In the book of Genesis, in the opening chapters, we read that the Spirit of the deep water, giving comfort and peace to all the things that Jesus had brought into being as he executed the will of the Father. That's the way the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit seem to work in the Bible. God has the plan. Jesus the Son sees it through, and the Holy Spirit carries it out. So here we have Jesus in the beginning. Jesus over everything in the beginning. And so Christmas, this Christmas story of light entering into the darkness, that God would not leave us alone in our own darkness and confusion, but rather spoke light, brought light into the world, not in an idea, not simply in words, but in the Word, in the person of Jesus, is really the great interruption. And this is the point in history that changes everything else. Without this thing, without this story, without this true unfolding of surprising events, without that, everything just keeps going in the same way it's always gone. But Jesus came to interrupt this cycle of sin and selfishness, to bring grace and truth into the picture and change our trajectory. I was looking this up recently, weird traditions that people have. Of course we have our own family traditions, but around the world people have traditions, and some of these are quite peculiar. There's this roller skating Christmas Eve service that happens in Venezuela. Do you know about this? This is in Caracas. Everyone dresses up as Santa Claus, and they ride around on rollerblades and roller skates to their Christmas Mass service. That is like the most exciting, fun Christmas Eve service I've ever been to. I want to be a part of that. In Japan, I just found this out like this week. In Japan, do you know what people like to eat for Christmas Eve? You know what people order for Christmas? They order it. They don't make it in their home. You'll never guess. Kentucky Fried Chicken. What? It's a thing. It's a thing. It's this marketing campaign that started in the 70s that has become just a family tradition for everyone. They order a bucket of chicken. Yes, Colonel Sanders he's like the Santa Claus of Japan. It's a crazy thing. And in parts of Eastern Europe, rather than decorating their tree with like snowflakes and tinsel, they hang spider webs. This is a reference to the fable of the poor family that buys a tree. They can't afford to decorate it, but a spider comes in the middle of the night and leaves webs all over the place. And in the morning when the sun hits it just right, it's glowing and it comes to life. People have these crazy traditions all over the world. I think maybe, I don't know where you're at on this spectrum, but there's a spectrum, I think, between two extremes when it comes to the way we view traditions. There are some people in the room who they need things to be different all the time. Like, how many of you feel that way? Like, you love change. You love to see things like shaken up a little bit. Do we have any of this? Most of them are young. Okay, they haven't, they're not holding on to something for stability anymore. Yeah. And then on the other end, there are people like who just need everything to be exactly the same every year. Like the ornaments on the tree need to be in the same place. That kind of thing. Like it's not Christmas if things don't go exactly the way that they did the year before that and the year before that. Where are you on that spectrum? On which extreme? Are you the traditionalist, or are you the one that needs change? 'Cause I think probably all of us fall somewhere along that spectrum. Here's the problem, I think, with traditions. So I think there's an unhealthy need for change. There certainly is this idea that I need things to change so that things don't stay the same, because without that sense of change, I feel like nothing is meaningful in my life. But I think on the other end of this need for tradition, that there is this hope that we put in things staying stable and things not changing. That as long as I get my tradition, then I'm safe, I'm secure. And the problem is that there is no practice, habit, tradition, place that can ever really give you and I the hope and security and safety that we're really all longing for. In fact, I believe that what John tells us in John chapter 1 might be the most true thing that I could even say about Christmas tonight. And that is that Jesus came to reorient our traditions around himself, around the truth. And I know that might sound like, for those of you who have questions about who God is and why people worship him, and the idea of traditional religion, like this idea that God deserves to be worshiped or needs to be worshiped. But here's the truth. This picture that we're given of Jesus is not one in which we can approach him lightly or look at this story as an outside observer and say, wow, isn't that special? John tells us that this is the Word who was with God in the beginning, and anything that you see that has ever been made was brought into being by him. He is the light, and he illuminates truth in our lives. And so I think that Jesus came to reorient our homes. He came so that we might, he invites us to reorient our lives around him. This is what John says in John chapter 1, verse 9 and following. This true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him, but to all who did receive him, to everyone who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will, nor of the flesh, not of the will of man, but of God. In other words, what we're being told in this passage is that we are being invited into the family of God to reorient our lives around Him, to discover who we really are. Forget what your family has told you about who you are. Forget what the world around you has told you about who you are. Forget what your teachers and your boss says about who you are. I mean, if they fail to tell you the truth of what God says about you, that you are loved, that you are valued, created in His image to bring about good things in the world out of the connection that you have with Him. Anything that falls short of that is a false identity. But when we are invited into the family of God, not because we were forced into it, not because we were born into it, but because God invited us in, we begin to reorient our understanding of who we are around the truth of who He is. So my life this year has been a little off-kilter, so to speak. As you heard, Pastor Phil said, I'm the former pastor of Safe Harbor. I did resign there 6 weeks ago. I don't want to talk a lot about that, save to say that I don't know what I'm doing next. I really don't know. And everything used to be so routine, predictable. I knew what Christmas Eve was going to look like. I knew what a Wednesday looked like and Tuesday looked like. And now people call and want to get together, and I just keep having all these schedule conflicts because I don't have a rhythm anymore. And I don't know what to do. My family doesn't know what to do. And in this time, I've been reminded again and again that I had a way of putting my hope and security in this very predictable way of living. In fact, I kind of always, I didn't realize this until after the fact, but this idea that I was a pastor became like part of who I am. And in fact, when I wanted to tell people about Jesus, I wouldn't tell them I'm a pastor. Like I would just tell them about my life. And then when they asked, what do you do? Well, then I'd be ready to pull it out and say, well, I'm a pastor. And they would say, what? You're a pastor? You don't seem like one. And I always relied on that to have an interesting conversation, but I can't do that anymore. So all I got now is, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus. And it wasn't until after going through all that, processing all that, that I realized that I put a lot of my security and safety and hope in that idea that I'm a pastor. And I don't think it's problematic. I think God has called me to live my life for Him. But even if I'm not a pastor, I'm a follower of Jesus. And I've been invited into the family of God. And that's who I am, a child of God. Not because I chose it, but because He chose me and invited me. I didn't know about this till recently. Maybe you already knew this, but the movie It's a Wonderful Life was a modern retelling of the story of Ebenezer Scrooge in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And it didn't make sense to me until I heard this, and then all of a sudden, like, things just fell into place. All of these stories are about people who have a certain way of operating, who have to have their lives interrupted by an event so that they begin to operate in a different kind of way. Ebenezer Scrooge is very greedy. He has to be visited by some ghosts to change his trajectory, and at the end of the story, he is very generous. You got George Bailey, who at the beginning of A Wonderful Life is depressed and suicidal and ready to give up. He thinks that he's not valuable to anyone, but his life is interrupted when an angel comes to visit him. And at the end of the story, he's grateful, right? And I think that we have these ways of operating that have to be interrupted in order for us to really become who God made us to be. See, here's what we read in John chapter 1. This is the last thing I want to read. John 1:14 is beautiful. John 1:14 says this, that the Word, that is Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen His glory, the glory of the only Son sent from the Father, full of grace and truth. What John is telling us is not simply that we're being invited into God's family to reorient our lives around him, what we're being told there is that Jesus entered into our reality so that we could discover what it truly means to find a place called home in our relationship with him. What I mean is that, like, all religions work this way, okay? There's this idea of God as a creator, as the standard of morality, as the rewarder of people who do good things. And in order to get there and to have this eternal home with that God, we have to do these good things to measure up and climb a moral ladder of sorts. So one day we get there. But the story of Christmas is exactly the opposite. The story of Jesus is the upside down version of that story that all religions tell. It's that Jesus made his home with us in spite of our moral imperfection, in spite of the way that we operate, in spite of the fact that we put our hope in all the wrong things, in spite of the fact that we need things to be predictable and for life to go on the way that it's always gone on so that we don't get thrown off course. In spite of that, Jesus made his home with us. Jesus entered into our reality. And he interrupted our traditions. Not to bring us home to be with him, but to bring home to us. I was wandering around downtown Sanford a few weeks back, December 6th, which happens to be a German holiday, a tradition, called Krampus. You know about this? I didn't even want to put a picture on the screen because it's scary to the kids. The idea is that you got two people in the Christmas story. You got Santa Claus and you got Krampus. Santa Claus is the rewarder of children who are good. He brings gifts to the children. Krampus is this evil German demon who threatens to take children to the bad place if they're not good. I don't know where that comes from. But I know that it is very like most of my experiences among a group of people who want to better themselves. That we threaten if people don't behave a certain way. We lay a guilt trip on people if they don't measure up. We lay shame on people so that they'll let go of this false identity of themselves. Isn't that the way people get better? But John says that Jesus, the Word, came from the Father full of grace and truth. And he interrupted all of our ways of operating, our ways of being, our traditions, our habits, things that needed to be interrupted because they never led anywhere good. They didn't lead us to the place that we really wanted to be. Look, I know 2020 has been this big, fat mess. I know it's interrupted your life because it's interrupted mine. But what if we put our hope in all the wrong places and this is just one more opportunity to respond to the place that God is inviting us, to a place called home, where he tells us who we are. He reminds us what is true and reaffirms daily that we are his. Well, if you don't know what that means at all, I'd love to talk to you. There are people here who would love to talk to you. The Christmas story is so much more than a baby in a manger surrounded by angels. It's the story of God making his home with us, so that we might discover who we truly are and what we are made for. And maybe this Christmas, as we begin to light some candles and remind ourselves of what this is really all about, maybe this is an opportunity for you to let go of something. Let go of a tradition, let go of a habit, go of a way of operating, let go of frustration, let go of expectations, let go of these things that keep us from truly living. And as we remind ourselves that Jesus made his home among us, that we would take hold of him, respond to him, and find life.